1901, life expectancy for a man in England was 45 and it was 49 for a woman. In 2001, it was 77 for a man and 81 for a woman. And now what the Department of Work and Pensions are talking about is that 60 may be the new 70. Because a man of 60 in 1977 could expect to live 17 years. Now a man of 70 can expect to live 17 years. People may spend as long in retirement as they do in work without an increase in the state retirement age. There's been a doubling in the number of oldest old in the past 10 years, because if you look at the figures, at the start of the NHS in 1948, half the population died before they got to retirement age. And now it's only 18%, and that number's been conserved for about 20 years, hence the increase in the very oldest old in society. Now, I put it to you that that's a victory for society. That's something we should celebrate. Better sanitation, better wealth, better diet, better public health, eradication of cholera and TB, better vaccination in childhood. It's not just about societal change, though, it's a victory for medicine. Preventative medicine, for instance, better management of high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes and long-term conditions, but also conditions that formerly killed people in midlife, people now survive from. I've been a qualified doctor for 22 years, and at the start of my career, I routinely saw people in midlife dying from heart attacks, something you'll very rarely see now because they can get to the hospital quickly and have interventions. So previous killers, pneumonia, heart disease and so forth, now become long-term conditions. Instead of celebrating ageing, though, we use very unhelpful language, don't we? We talk about time bombs and, tsunamis and burdens. And, we have health professionals talking about things like bed blockers. But it's unhelpful language, isn't it? And there's also a reality gap in the way that older people are portrayed in the media. You've got a false dichotomy. On the one hand, we have Fuja Singh, 98-year-old Sikh marathon runner, oldest runner every year, yeah? There's a 101-year-old called Buster Collins that works at Pimlico Plumbers for half the week, and he's always trotted out on the BBC. George Moyes, the 98-year-old skydiver, or that marvellous 82-year-old that won Spain's Got Talent doing salsa dancing, wasn't it? So we have these kind of celebrity old people, Isn't Sheila Hancock marvellous, being in Sister Act 8 shows a week at 78? On the other hand, Ming Campbell, who's a QC, Olympic sprinter, 61, becomes leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he's portrayed as some adventurous, doddering old fool by Steve Bell in The Guardian. And the Daily Mail runs this Dignity for the Elderly campaign, as if all people from 65 to 100 are one amorphous mass, and portrays older people as, victims of abuse and neglect. If you go to the States, they still do allow venerable older TV presenters on current affairs shows, as long as they've got Botoxed faces and look like they work out every day. But we don't see people who look in the slightest frail. And even older people themselves can be ageist, can't they? Bruce Forsyth, I'm not doddery, I am not, every week on Strictly Come Dancing. So we need a bit of a reality check. On the one hand, most older people are not beset by terrible health problems. We have good data on this because we have the General Household Survey, the Health Survey for England and the Census. And what people say about their own health, even people over 80, 2/3 of people say their health is good or very good. Even over 80, 2/3 of people say that their life is not limited by a long-standing condition that stops them doing what they want to do. That's good news. Even over 90, only half the population are living in long-term care facilities. On the other hand, and this is where the balance comes in, you can't get away from the fact that if you live long enough, certain things will happen. You will develop long-term medical conditions. There are 800,000 people with dementia at the moment, and that's going to double in the next 20 years. 1 in 3 women over 60 will break a bone from osteoporosis. And long-term conditions of midlife, like cardiac failure that people go on with, most people who are deaf or who are visually impaired are older. And then there's also the challenge of people who are frail. In other words, they don't have much in reserve, and that means they struggle to get around, struggle to get in and out of a chair or walk. And when people who are frail become ill, they often come to hospital because they've decompensated. And actually, the core business now, I don't like to talk about healthcare as a business, the core activity in health and social care is old people. Older people are us. And it's particularly older people with long-term conditions who go to the GP, who occupy expensive hospital beds, and it's those same people who are dependent on more than one service. Older people's services are the key to getting systems right. It's also worth pointing out that the Equality Act 2010 for the first time explicitly banned age-based discrimination in the provision of health and social care. It's now illegal to discriminate on the grounds of age, and there's lots of objective evidence that older people do suffer discriminatory services in terms of attitudes, patronising attitudes, elder speak, infantilising language, being denied choice. If you interview health professionals themselves, they'll say it. In a recent survey on nutrition, 2/3 of nurses working in the NHS said they wouldn't trust their local hospital to look after the nutritional needs of their own elderly relatives. A survey of 1,000 NHS managers said that the most discriminated against group were older people and people with mental health problems. And we know that conditions of ageing like dementia have received far less attention. We need to think not about projecting what young, fit people think older people would want, but ask them what they want for themselves. And there's numerous surveys talking to older people. They're not expecting to be as fit and as independent as they were in their 20s. What they want is to retain as much independence and well-being and control of their lives as they can and keep on doing the things that they like doing within reason. And when they do become vulnerable, or when they are dying, they want control and they want information and they want to be treated with dignity and respect. That's what they tell us they want, okay? If you go and speak to groups of older people, as I do, they are thirsty for information about what diet should I take to protect my bones? What exercise can I do to stay healthy and independent? That's what they want for themselves. So I certainly don't see it's a problem giving people information that they want. But most of the gains in life expectancy and health haven't just come from high-tech, modern medical intervention. As I said at the start, a lot of it's a triumph for things like housing and sanitation and nutrition. Even as a doctor, it's quite useful for me to know how I might avoid that or cut down my chances of getting it. I'm getting a bit fat these days, and finding out that having a waist above 38 inches puts you at risk of having diabetes or heart disease is useful. I can choose or not choose to do something about it. And I certainly don't regard that just being given the information as being hectored or nannied. And I think the thing about high-tech, high-cost intervention, that's not where most of it's at. We can give people antibiotics for pneumonia. We can treat their broken hip when they come in. Are we honestly saying we're not going to do that when people get ill? Because those kind of things are keeping people alive. When I speak to older people in this country and they think their life's not worth living, that's fine. They'll be the first to refuse high-tech intensive care at the end of life. So it's a slightly artificial debate, that kind of doctor's dilemma about rationing. And I think what we need to concentrate on is two things, really. Making sure that older people who use services are treated with dignity and respect and without discrimination, whoever they are and whichever service they present to. And also, it's about time we had a transparent and realistic dialogue on the funding of services. So I welcome the Commission on Long-Term Funding of Social Care that's been announced, because at least we can get it out there in the public domain. I'll stop there.
If we're going to have longer lives, then we can't have miserable lives. These extra years can't just be about survival for its own sake. We must provide elements of satisfaction, comfort and fulfillment. I also come at this issue from a left field, not from a medical perspective, but from one that believes that design can make a real difference to quality of later life. Now, I accept that genetic and biological factors have a big say in longevity. Of course they do, but so do environmental factors, and many of these can be designed. In fact, how we design them, I think, is critical to the debate. So my position, in essence, is that I'd like to see the argument move off the baseline of medicine or no medicine to encompass a far wider and more imaginative range of interventions to improve the health and quality of life for older people. And I talk frequently to students here at the college about the key design challenges of ageing. And it often boils down to redefining our cultural approach to what is ageing. And I think the biggest challenge is that we face something that is unprecedented. We have more octogenarians driving on our roads than ever before. How do we encourage safer driving or persuade unsafe older drivers to give up their cars? Or how do we create new age-friendly forms of transport? There are a host of unprecedented issues for designers to solve long before the medics get involved. And then I'm right with David on the issue of the challenge of definition. There is this terrible tendency, and designers and marketeers are amongst the worst, are lumping all older people over 50, into one homogenous group which will act in a completely homogenous, predictable way. You know, they talk about the grey market, which drives me mad. Our own research suggests exactly the opposite. We did a study called Yo-Yos some years ago, called Young Gold. The older people actually operate in modes. They'll make some decisions based on experience and age, and then they'll do other things irrationally. They'll have one car which is, if they're wealthy, that's a sports coupe, and they'll have another one which is safe and environmentally friendly. They'll operate in modes. And this idea of a pivotal, oscillating, transitional idea of aging. And this leads me on to another common misconception about old age, is that life transitions are generally smooth and well planned, in contrast to the more disruptive changes of the teenage years. Our own situational research with older people has discovered that disruption, displacement, and dependency, more typically associated with younger people, are key features of later life. Think about it, cliff's edge retirement, moving from a larger home to a smaller retirement flat, the death of a partner or spouse, sudden dependency because you fall and break your hip. All of these things are everyday aspects of older people. These misconceptions are very powerful, and I think my point is that if we don't properly understand, or if we willfully misrepresent the true nature of older lives, we can't design the healthcare systems and preventative measures that will ease the welfare burden. I'm particularly interested in longer working lives. I'm interested in the design of the office environment. You know, the first step to independent living is often economic independence, and economically productive activity is often a very healthy form of activity for older people. But today's workplaces, they're noisy, tiring, open plan, hard materials. They're appalling for older workers. And, you know, at a time when we need wisdom and knowledge in the knowledge economy, I think there's a lot of institutional ambivalence inside organisations towards ageing. Despite all the legislation, older people are just not on the radar for training and advancement over a certain age. So on the question of ageing and medicine, I think it's more than about ageing and medicine. It's about cultural attitudes to ageing and how we design the environment to be more inclusive of older people. I'll stop there.
When I cross a hospital entrance, I often pass an elderly looking and obviously frail person in a wheelchair smoking a cigarette, and I think this person is on death's doorstep and still they are smoking. You know, now as a passionate believer in the NHS, I don't question his or anyone's right to treatment, but somehow that sight still rankles, and now I realise, of course, that I'm falling right into the cultural stereotypes that David so vividly highlights, where older people are either unentitled and in the way, or they're svelte silver foxes in tracksuits playing badminton on the beach, or maybe rascally indestructible roués with a supply of Havanas and vintage cognac and the suspicion of a better sex life than mine. Where, David asks, is the balance? So in that spirit, we might refer to 3 goals of good enough ageing: keeping mobile enough to get around, keeping up our spirits, and keeping our marbles. Let me focus on those last 2. So keeping up our spirits. Here in the West, well-being is very much the new mantra, following the influential positive psychology movements in the United States. Every government department in the UK now has a well-being agenda. And the term well-being's virtually replaced psychiatric disorder or mental health in research. And yet in the West, well-being is almost invariably confined to the hedonic sense, referring to pleasure, happiness, satisfaction. And no one could have summed that up more than Hobbes in the 17th century when he wrote that happiness lies in the successful pursuit of our human appetites. Sometimes I think that the mushrooming research on well-being is actually scarcely more sophisticated than that. In fact, we largely ignore the other sense of well-being, the eudaimonic, from the Greek meaning higher self, which refers to a deeper sense of self-acceptance and life purpose. Now, that's a long and ancient debate, and I don't have time to summarize it now. But I think recognition of this more subtle sense of well-being allows a concept of sanity in old age that goes well beyond this imperative to stay in a state of forced youthfulness. Nearly 750,000 people in the UK are living with dementia, one of the most feared conditions of old age. And there are currently no effective treatments for the majority of people with these disorders. But more and more, we're learning that the gradual accumulation over decades of risks like smoking, obesity, hypertension, sedentary lifestyle are modifiable risks for dementia. This perspective is acknowledged by the government's National Dementia Strategy, summed up by the advice that what's good for your heart is also good for your head. So if a therapeutic silver bullet for Alzheimer's disease seems still out of our reach, should we focus instead on reducing our cardiovascular risk? Should we put out those Havanas and flush away the brandy and get out our tracksuits? Well, maybe, but paradoxically, there's evidence that those who escape premature death are likely to be at increased risk of Alzheimer's disease through survival itself. If we live long enough, we will all get demented in the end. So yes, the important strategy, given that we cannot live forever, is what we call compression of morbidity. And to use that well-known catchphrase, put life into these years rather than just adding years to life. Personally, I think that I hope that lifelong learning can help to achieve that by actually preserving the richness of mental life through this time of survival. So if we want to sex and drug and rock and roll our way into later life, that seems like a glorious choice, as long as we recognise that that for many people that final journey is going to be a long and uncomfortable one. But most of all, I take issue because there's so much more to quality of life than a perpetual state of kidulthood.
I'm a bit of a doom monger. And actually what I want to say is that we're talking about the ageing in medicine, quantity or quality. I want to think about the quality of life for the young people who are around these old people. We've concentrated very much on the old people and how important it is for them to have a great time. Well, of course, I'm all for that. I'm 66 myself. But how are the young people going to feel with this huge burden of old people above them? I don't think any of us quite realise what a big problem this is going to be. And what are we going to do about it? We haven't, we're terribly concerned about climate change, but we haven't addressed this problem of a hugely ageing population. I mean, even if these old people live brilliant lives, it's still a problem. I mean, it's rather like the Queen. She's living a long time, but look at her poor son. He's going to be, old and bald and bent by the time she's died. I'm concerned for the future. I'm not looking at individual old people, because obviously we all want to live as full of beans as long as we can. But there is a different look, which is at society and the survival of the human race, I think. The compression of morbidity is a theory, which I think I'm right, is to say that if we look after ourselves better, we will live a better quality of lives independently, longer, and not have so long in hospital. So instead of, as it were, going like that and then ages going down, being cared for, we go along like this and then drop off the cliff. Great idea. And obviously the more information we have and the more we're all encouraged to do this, the better. The other way of coping is to not keep old people alive, to enforce living wills, which are very, very difficult. I mean, I've made dozens of living wills. My doctor says there's no point. Nobody's going to pay any attention to them. I'm all for assisted dying. I'm with Mary Warnock on this subject. And the minute that I'm remotely not able to cope, I hope that I'm annihilated. I'd be very happy. I'm not saying that everybody would be, but I would like that it to be easier for those people like me to have that choice and those rights. The problem is that in 1950, there were 12 support workers, now that's people aged 15 to 64 in the world, for every person 65 or over. In 2009, that was down to 9, and by 2050, the number will be down to 4. That means that there are going to be far fewer young people to look after those old people who are not able to look after themselves. And frankly, it won't be possible financially to be able to keep all these old people in this wonderful, comfortable state that we've heard about. And it's all very well to say, that old people are tremendous and all having great lives. The truth is that even I, at 66, I'm frailer than I was. There's no getting around it. I don't have a major illness, but I, faced with the idea of painting every room in my house and the ceilings and recaning all my chairs, which I used to do when I was young, I would absolutely, no, I'm not up to it. If you look at humanity and society like a forest, if there's a good tree manager, they cut down the old trees in order to let the young trees grow. I would like healthcare rationed for me. I don't care, I don't want to be horrible and say it should be rationed for everyone else, but I think a lot of us oldies are very selfish in wanting to live and live and live. We've been young, we've had a good time, and I think it's time to think of the young people in our world. I think we have to rethink our ideas about death. Is life as sacred as we used to think it was? Why is there this fear of death, and why are we so frightened of it? My feeling is that death isn't so bad when you consider the alternative.
Virginia gave examples of statistics about the number of younger people looking at supporting over 65s. But already we're seeing more and more over 65s actually wanting to work and actually being able to continue to work. And it's not something to be scared of. And actually what we need to value is life in general. What we have here is a challenge that needs to be addressed in various different ways. But I don't think being scaremongering and asking to die is the way to address that.
By the way, Virginia, I'm almost 10 years older than you, but I'll come paint your ceiling for you, dear, any time. Thank you. I quite enjoy doing all that. I think the thing is that we who are old now are pioneers, really, and I think that we must remember that too. I think that we who are old have a responsibility. We don't give them all up, a social and moral responsibility. I don't think all of us need to become the concern of our offspring or their offspring. On the contrary, it seems to me that a lot of old people these days are a bigger help in the home of the younger people than they ever were in the past I remember. But I think what I'm really trying to say is that it's very hard to generalize. As we advance, we, the pioneers, and the young ones who will be coming after us, we learn. And it's new country. What we're losing sight of in our generalizing is humanity, is feeling. And we are a family. It is what the professor of geriatrics once mentioned to me, Raymond Tallis, called there is a chronological apartheid. I think we have to be careful to make sure that the wall is destroyed and that we remain a family.
Well, being in my mid-80s, one of the things that's most annoying, I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been very healthy. But one of the frustrating things of growing old is not being able to do the things that I've always wanted to do. I've always been a keen gardener, I've always been a keen walker. And all the time I'm thinking, oh, come on, get off your bottom and get it done, you know. But no, I can't. The other thing is, that's very annoying, is when younger people think that you have no opinions. They'll sit you in a corner and say, are you comfortable, dear? And I won't tell you what I feel like answering the question. I think I'd be thrown out of the room. But I would like to say that as you get older, despite all what you think about when you're younger, life is sweet.
I speak as a pensions actuary, and I think it's really important in this debate that we distinguish between chronological ageing and biological ageing. Yes, people do get older, but to be a 65-year-old today isn't the same as being a 65-year-old 20 years ago. But I think that's the reason why the figures that Virginia quoted about the number of 65-year-olds compared to the number of, inverted commas, workers are actually completely irrelevant, because many people beyond 65 do work. Actually, the NHS pension scheme, which is one of the ones I'm very much involved with, the average age of retirement in the NHS is 63, even though most people can go at 55. Doctors in particular, you have to throw them out of the door. People don't want to retire. And the whole idea we have now, based around the cliff edge of retirement, is something that I think we need to re-examine. I do a lot of work in the trade union movement. When I say that, people say, you want us to work till we drop. And to an extent, yes. I think people should be willing to work until they can't work anymore. Certainly that's what I intend to do. I appreciate it's not the same when you're a bin man. Brilliant lives is one of the things that Virginia said. I don't think older people should have brilliant lives, except to the extent that everybody else does. I think they shouldn't have, they should have exactly the same rights as the rest of society to good lives. Finally, I had a bit of a spread bet on the first person who would mention burden, who would use the word burden. Interesting that it was Virginia again. Old people are not a burden. Most old people work. Lots of old people don't get paid. but I can give you hundreds of examples of old people who work, and it's not just grannies giving childcare, as Irma mentioned. It's also, my dad's the groundsman at the cricket club, he's in his 80s. My son's British cycling trainer is 82. And so, you know, this idea that old people stop working and therefore stop contributing is quite wrong. We as a society subsidise lots of work that's done today by paying people pensions. And if we're not prepared to do that anymore, we need to accept that we will have to pay for that currently unpaid work.
To say that old people are not a burden, of course, loads and loads aren't, but loads and loads are. And I'm sure that when Irma is talking about people saying, oh, I'll be glad when they die, but my parents die because I'll get the house. Actually, it's not just about the house often. It's about the freedom to be yourself and not to have this, to be a child. My parents are both dead, and I feel blessed, really, that they've died, because it's given me a chance to be me.
A lot of work is online, and I'm astounded by the number of people well into their 60s and beyond who are really good at computers now. So there is a potential out there where you are an invisible person, in a way. Old people carry a weight of memories. Oh, such a weight of memories that come back sometimes when least expected, but they do make wisdom too.
Chronological age versus biological age, yeah. I mean, this is why the DWP are very interested in 60 is that, well, 70 is the new 60, because they're well aware, if you look at the data, we are compressing morbidity. People are living longer without significant limiting conditions. But of course, people who've been doing back-breaking jobs rather than sexy careers often are quite glad to get out of work at 60. So it's a bit of a middle-class construct that everyone wants to keep on working. Now, if I may, just tie up what Virginia said with the lady over there about poor quality treatment. The first thing is about advanced decisions, living wills. The General Medical Council could have a doctor in very serious trouble if they disrespect someone's stated wishes about end-of-life care. The problem isn't that people don't take any notice of living wills, it's the fact that we're not using them enough. And there's people every day coming in from nursing homes who are clearly dying, who've clearly got dementia, to hospitals to die, because we're not using enough advanced care planning, and we should be using more of it. But it is true to say that older people still get relatively worse treatment for the same conditions than young people do, and there's lots of objective evidence of that. If it's based on evidence about their survival rate, that's one thing, but if it's just completely capricious, then that's wrong. And the final thing about the life people lead in dementia care homes, they still have human dignity. You wouldn't say, if you were doing something to 1 or 2 year olds, that because they're not fully conscious, what's the point of that? And there are excellent examples of allowing people, just as with end-of-life care for cancer, allowing people who live with dementia in a care home to have a good experience of living with dementia, to relieve distress, to not be sedating them with chemicals all the time, and make the care more person-centred. And I think the final thing about withholding treatment is, what would you not do? Because the majority of older people who are coming into hospital have something like a treatable chest infection, a broken hip. Are you honestly saying, let's just not treat them and let them die? Most of it, as I said at the start, is not about giving people high-cost intensive chemotherapy or intensive care unit medicine. It's about doing fairly low-tech things that work. So the challenge is, what would you have us stop doing if we're really going to ration healthcare, especially if it's your relative?
We have a crazy system in the 21st century where most people, who have a job are working too long, which affects their health, in bad working conditions, even white-collar, middle-class jobs, appalling working conditions, and then they stop, which has huge psychological and physiological and mental effects, this cliff's edge retirement. Can we not have a much more progressive regime of working life where people work less and scale down and take on other things progressively over a number of years from their mid-40s onwards, and not have this working life stops, and so that more people who are older are working longer because they're infilling people working less than 40 hours a week. The whole kind of old contract of 40 hours a week, 40 weeks a year for 40 years, we've got to change that.
If you read the World Alzheimer's International report on Alzheimer's, they say that we need a 15-fold increase in Alzheimer's research to match heart disease and a 30-fold to match the research going on in cancer. And you and I would probably agree cancer and heart disease don't have enough research. So it's not only because I'm an author of Big Potatoes, the manifesto for innovation, but I want to hear Do we not want more silver bullets? Do we not want that? Or is in anti-scientific Britain? Secondly, do we not recognise science and cures for Alzheimer's as part of the caring professions? Isn't that technology push something without medicalising social problems, which I agree we shouldn't do? Doesn't science and scientists have a creative and caring role to play in alleviating some of these conditions? Should we not be increasing the budgets for those, even though we don't necessarily have a solution? And I think the lady at the front, at 57, I can remember everything that she said. Just recently, this week, it was said that a scientist was hoping to map and visualise people's dreams. So to get back the memory at the end of a lovely day out for older people, the following morning, should be part of the things that we're searching for in science. What's wrong with that? Get the memories back. So we must have that sense of confidence that science can play its part in all of this as well.
I've got some doubt about the extent to which Virginia Ironside is actually playing devil's advocate. I think she's really misrepresented younger people and the fertility that they represent for bridging the divide that Irma Kurtz wants to see bridged, and we all do. Actually, younger people, I think, have huge potential to understand the importance, the value, the contribution and the worth of older people, and we need to find ways of exploiting it. In fact, the ageism that is so prevalent within health and to some degree social care services represents a major impediment to the well-being of older people, as we've talked about. What are we going to do about that ageism? What are we going to do about the culture that says actually we're going to deny somebody with dementia a hip replacement because we think there's a poor clinical outcome? Lots of issues like that, particularly in a more devolved world where we're leaving all this to individual GPs. So I think it's a really major question about the healthcare system and how we're going to challenge the ageism within it, particularly in the acute sector.
I still think that the barriers are cultural, and we have to address those and bring up the science alongside.
Population ageing is a fact of life. It's not going to go away. So I think we need to concentrate, as I said at the start, on ensuring that older people who do use services are treated with dignity and respect and with the same consideration younger people will be treated with. So I agree with you entirely. There's lots of objective evidence of discriminatory care. And the same applies to the balance of research funding, that traditionally some areas like cancer have been seen as very sexy and have received the lion's share of the funding, and yet things like dementia research have been undervalued.
I think, yes, we would all love a silver bullet for unhealthy ageing. But there, in fact, has been an enormous effort in the pharmaceutical industry to create a pill for Alzheimer's disease. As a population scientist, all I see is that actually hasn't paid great dividends, and that we're much better off looking to lifestyle right across the life course as ways to try and gain control of that.
Have we got the resources to deal with this enormous number of old people? If we have, that's great, we can live forever, but I'm not sure that we can, and I think that's something that we ought to look at. Young people are very keen on giving old people their dignity. A lot of the young people here don't actually know what it's like to have a 90-year-old incontinent parent living with them. You're not old enough. And finally, no, I don't want to tell old people they're a burden and that they've got to buzz off. But I want to say, when I'm a burden, I want to say it's time for me to go, and this is out of unselfishness. It's time for me to go, and in time for other people to have a turn. And I think there's a lot of selfishness involved in this preoccupation with, we must live forever.
I think as problems go, everyone living longer is a rather nice one to have.